Book 1, Chapter 30 of Short History of the Christian Church by John Fletcher Hurst. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 30. The Close of the Early Period. This rapid extension of Christianity was the most notable characteristic of the borderland between the early Church and the medieval period. Missions were promoted by the very growth of the papacy. The bishops saw that their hopes of territorial power could be realized in the West and North rather than in the East, and each strove to surpass his predecessor in the good work. Missionaries and church officers were sent out from Rome with authority to plant missions, build up a literature, and indoctrinate the people in the truths of Christianity. In many instances these attempts failed, the missionaries were killed, and the old heathenism of the provinces triumphed over the young Christianity. But the tide of religious truth was too strong for final resistance. New efforts were made, and finally the old idols were removed, the temples were destroyed, and Christian chapels were erected in their place. Christianity carried with it the disposition to create a literature. The missionary was often a man of ardent theological tastes, and immediately began to adapt the growing literature of Christianity to the new people. Schools, as at Fulda in Germany, were at once organized. Here the Scriptures were copied, elementary books were written, and small libraries were collected. Centers of theological learning were thus formed. The development of a literary taste was never interrupted, even amid the convulsions of the Middle Ages. The Christian pen and school were never disturbed by the storms of warfare with false faiths. The Venerable Bede represented the patient and scholarly class of his whole age. He was born in Durham, England, about A.D. 673, spent his laborious life of a century at the monastery of Wearmouth and Yarrow, and reared a literary monument of 40 different works, 25 of which were on biblical subjects. History and kindred topics were treated in the remaining 15. He died in great joy, singing psalms with his pupils, immediately after concluding his Anglo-Saxon translation of John's Gospel. Wordsworth, in a beautiful fancy, thus rebukes the idler by presenting the picture of the toiling Bede. But what if one, through grove or flowery mead, indulging thus at will the creeping feet of a voluptuous indolence, should meet thy hovering shade, O venerable Bede? The saint, the scholar, from a circle freed of toil stupendous, in a hallowed seat of learning, where thou heardst the billows beat on a wild coast, rough monitors to feed perpetual industry. Sublime recluse! The recreant soul, that dares to shun the debt imposed on humankind, must first forget thy diligence, thy unrelaxing use of a long life, and, in the hour of death, the last dear service of thy passing breath. Christian doctrines assumed, by the close of the early period, a settled condition. The Church had elaborated its theological standards, while its creeds were now repeated from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Britain and the shores of the North Sea. The larger heresies had still a constituency, but were in rapid progress of disintegration. They throve only in the remoter provinces, more especially in the East, and were alienated from the sympathy of the great body of Christian people in all lands. When the Middle Ages began, other controversies arose which were largely speculative and had but little relation to the Arian and other great struggles. Roman centralization constantly gained strength. Church offices multiplied rapidly, and the close of the early period was the signal for larger measures for Roman primacy. The bishops of Rome were the real rulers of southern Europe, from the Constantinian dynasty to the reign of Charlemagne. The great wealth which had been at the command of the empire was now largely diverted into ecclesiastical channels, and was used to build large churches, organize missions, support a rapidly growing clergy, found schools, and create a literature. Superstition was the darkest color in the picture of the Church at this transitional period. Miraculous powers were attributed to the dust of the saints. The places where they died were hallowed, and were regarded as most fit sites for stately sacred buildings. The saintly calendar increased rapidly. Festivals were organized in memory of each one who had risen above the surface of his times as an exemplar of piety, devotion, and sacrifice. The condition of the people may account in large measure for the prevalence and force of the tendency towards superstition. When Constantine made Christianity the state religion, the many millions of the Roman Empire were thrust upon the Church for training and development. The burden was altogether too great. The people of the centres were still beneath the spell of the pagan traditions and gross superstitions which had grown out of polytheistic systems. The populations of the provinces were in even worse plight. Their ancestral faiths were a rude conglomeration of fetishism. There was not even a social elevation on which to build. It is not a matter of wonder, therefore, that when such heterogeneous and untrained multitudes were thrust suddenly upon the Church, for its care, the superstitious habit should be slow to yield to the new Christian conditions. When the Church passed into the darkness of the Middle Ages, the question was, could it endure the ordeal of vast wealth, superstition, and clerical assumption? When the Reformation came, the question was answered. Much was lost during the long night, but light came at last. The power of the Church to purify itself is the greatest proof of its divine origin, and the clearest prophecy of its certain conquest of the world. End of chapter 30. End of Book 1.